Chapter 216, Trouble at the Entrance. It was late in the afternoon when the westbound group arrived in the vicinity of Vismont Village. The familiar wall was there, and it was as ugly as ever. Among the group of nearly 100 or so people, a certain trio couldn't help but huddle together for a discussion. Afraid, Crow uttered, dark eyes staring at the level 2 fence in front of him. They knew very well what they were set here to do would rouse ire from the higher-ups of this territory. It was difficult to believe that a few days ago, they were being bullied so harshly simply for speaking out. But now they came back to bully it in turn. This was the power of having a backer. Dog pompously scoffed at his question, but his shaking knees gave him away. We have Rowan here. Sunny looked a little worried. What if that guy hires NPCs too? Last time the village center was only 1 floor, Dog said, but his voice was a bit quieter than before. He probably can't. How long ago was that so much could happen? The group chatted as they approached the gate. Their eyes were soon met with the sight of quiescent guards lounging about. They were lazy in their stance, uninspired with their jobs, and someone was even carelessly sitting down and eating fruit while slowly falling asleep. However, the arrival of their group made enough noise that it woke up every one of the guards. Their group was not too big compared to the refugees who immigrated from fallen villages, but they were not small either. Seeing Crow, Dog, and Sunny, the eyes of a few guards narrowed. You look a bit familiar. They did not deliberately hide their identities. One was for pride, and the other was they had no way. Fabric was still expensive, and they couldn't make mystery robes. Well, we lived here before. The guards sneered, looking at them smugly. Oh, you like living in the wild then? This guy obviously looked up to this territory so much that he didn't think there'd be any better situation outside of it. He did not even notice their clean skin and clothes, neither did he see their healthy complexions. However, he did see the items they were carrying. What tray in the bags? Resources we're trying to sell, Crow said blandly, implying it was just wood and stone as anyone else would think. After all, bluntly lying to this customs officer and getting discovered would definitely get them in a lot more trouble than it was worth. Most of the guards scoffed in distaste and were about to let them pass. However, someone had a very good nose and got a whiff of the supposedly scentless food inside. It put Dog's name to shame. Wait, he said, trudging in front of them. He had a large belly, an amazing thing considering the state of food when they left. He sniffed at Sunny's backpack, sending goosebumps. Dog frowned and pulled her closer to him. The guard did not notice this exchange. His attention was completely on the bags. Oh, smells good, let me see. He looked curious, extending his grubby hands to the nearest bag, his tone non-negotiable. They frowned but had no choice but to show. Sunny reluctantly opened the backpack, revealing a light box containing the lightest food that was most practical to carry, biscuits. They didn't look very special by Terran standards, but it was enough to make the guards widen their eyes and drool. Yo, bloody hell. Biscuits. When they saw everyone was carrying a flimsy cotton backpack, their eyes sparkled. They didn't even think of asking where it came from, but just looked at them greedily. So many days of that horrendous food must have gotten to their brains. The Alterans frowned at the sight of their greedy faces. This was not the type of hype they had hoped to receive. The guards cheered as they looked at the bags of the other people. It was as if it was already theirs. Wow, jerky. Shit, is this instant noodles? Why do you have so many? Soft bread. This is rice cakes, holy cow. Then the leader, a bulky man who went by the name of Brong, couldn't help narrowing his eyes at the odd group. They must have more in their space. This made everyone frown even deeper. A few were even prepared to start fighting. Then letting the tense air ferment, Brungo grinned, showing his ugly golden teeth. But we are not corrupt people. Things in people's space stay in people's space. However, before their team could heave a sigh, Brungo smiled and looked at them, tone as if he was giving them arms. We are good guards, and we will only require what you hold right now. His subordinates grinned, arrogantly stepping forward to near their harvest. You'll need to leave this here to enter, he said with an unquestionable tone. Dog, Sunny, and more immediately went to mother hen mode to protect their stuff, but the more composed ones managed to calm them down. It was Crow who stepped forward to talk it over. He addressed Brungo, being the leader and all. We can indeed give them to you, Crow started, earning the shocked gazes of his friends. He raised his hand to stop them from speaking. But we don't have to pay the temporary fees and accommodation for a week, and you will still have to give us a few gold up front. That is their value. A guard sneered, "Are you stupid? Are you willing, or do we make a scene, calling the Lord for hiring gangsters as guards?" Crow cut him off with a threat, trying to keep his stance confident. He wasn't even lying, these bastards really were gangsters. The gangster guards were triggered and glared. Some were indeed worried, while others were just aggressive. These people stepped forward to grab Crow, but a pair of hands appeared in front of them, holding the two men down. The two were a little startled, not yet absorbing how effortlessly they were both stopped by a hand and glared at its owner. "Who are you?" the bigger one asked, and was a little startled at the man's look. He was a lot taller than they were, more muscular, and he had unusual crimson-colored hair and eyes. "We don't want trouble," the mysterious red-haired man said. "Then pay up," the guards said, saliva splattering on their faces. Rowan's face darkened, and even his subordinates shivered. Fortunately for the Vismont guards, Rowan had a calm personality despite his turbulent element. "We did mention our terms." Calmly, Rowan simply repeated their conditions. "If you cannot pay for it, then do not ask for it." This naturally angered the guards, who yelled at him in turn. "You don't tell me what to do, ouch." Rowan placed the appropriate amount of force to restrict them and make them feel a little pain. Primarily, it was to stop them from speaking and splatter saliva all over him. The two men paled when they realized they couldn't move an inch. They raised their eyes to meet the terrifying, odd-colored eyes of the man, who still wore contact lenses at this juncture, still red ones. More importantly, why was he so strong? As guards, many of them were level 3 already, but they had no chance against this guy. "Are you letting us pass or not?" Rowan asked with a calm tone, but the pressure of his grip was gradually getting stronger. "Fine, fine," the men squeaked like slaughtered goo-goo birds. "We'll let you go, let you go." Rowan scoffed and released his grip. The sudden loss of holding force and the pain drove the two aggressive guards to their knees. Rowan then motioned for the group to step towards the interior of the territory. Seeing that the guards were not moving, he nodded and also turned away. However, certain guards were not reconciled. Together, they sprinted towards his back, aiming to destroy his spinal cord. They gave evil smirks as their feet approached the redhead's back, but suddenly he disappeared in front of them. Things happened quickly. The next thing they knew, huge hands landed on their faces and pushed them down back first on the ground. Bang! What? They couldn't even fathom what just happened when they realized things didn't even end there. A moment later, they felt their skin heating up, and they soon realized that their faces felt like it was burning. "AHDDHHHH. What the heck AHHHH?" Rowan took off his hand, leaving pinkish handprints on their faces. He abruptly lunged at Brungo, hitting him on the leg, forcing the man to kneel down in front of him. Rowan's instincts told him the two were ordered, and he would not let this man go without a warning. "You should control your own people," he told them, voice deep and heavy, "because you will also get blamed for the troubles they cause." "You," the man gasped, pale from the pain. He gritted his teeth and glared, but fear was evident in his eyes. Rowan looked down at the kneeling figure, sneering. "No wonder they were so weak, their leader is disgusting. Be thankful I just heated up their faces." Next time, he paused, red eyes even more menacing than before. "It will really burn." No more incidents at the entrance happened after that, primarily because no one was around. The group entered the territory without further ado, the guards' eyes sending daggers on their backs. "Won't they make trouble?" Sunny asked worriedly. "Oh, they will," Crow sneered, "but we'll handle it." As he said this, Crow paused and looked back, his dark eyes glazing over the guards twitching in pain on the ground. "Maybe we can use this chance to enlighten more people about this lord they adore." "Welcome to Vismont Village, LV2. Please pay 10 copper coins for an entry pass. If you have to avail residency, please pay 20 silver for temporary residence and 20 gold for permanent." Looking at the new rates, the old residents couldn't help but look at each other. Except for the visitor's pass did he increase the price. Dog frowned and Bull sneered. "Why am I not surprised?" he said. "I bet he told everyone to be thankful he managed to keep the visitor's pass the same." Unfortunately, it just so happened that there were citizens gathering wood and stone that overheard this sarcasm. Of course the Lord increases the price. The territory is level 2 now, the old man said, and a middle-aged woman next to him nodded. The territory protects us, gives us shelter and food. What is working a little harder? Besides, those who can only pay daily fees aren't affected at all. Yes. Our Lord is very kind. The rainbow fart session was obviously going to last for a while. They couldn't help but roll their eyes, furtively of course, and they politely excused themselves. The more tactful members of the group apologized, and some were amicable in chatting with them. At least the people here weren't ungrateful. At this point, they had to give it to Matthew. He was very good at brainwashing people. They walked along the forest path. It was narrow and rough, just as one would expect in untouched forests. They passed through a worn path made by frequent traffic passing through, heading to where more people were. Footsteps muffled by the leaves and twigs, the group continued to walk for a few more minutes. Soon the scenery changed, and the path grew wider and more pronounced. They began to hear the familiar bustle of crowds. They were then hit with the strong smell of people that hadn't taken a bath gathered together, combined with the sticking scent of human waste. Dog groaned, pinching his nose. Everyone else had scrunched up faces. But they pushed through and went further into the territory, eventually reaching the community that lived there. There were several flimsy huts leaning against each other. There were even some outright sheds made of twigs and leaves, and they looked so unstable that a small wind could topple it all. There were also tents, makeshift mostly, but a few were Terran camping tents. They were grouped together, forming a certain circle on their own, and surrounding a bonfire that seemed to serve the entire community of thousands. Wherever they looked, it was more or less the same. Everywhere, the crowd was dense and disorganized, and frankly very, very gross. However, it was worth taking notice that they had encountered the slums much earlier than the last time, indicating the population boom the territory experienced. By visual judgment, the population lost during the last beast tide had been recovered by new sets of refugees. They wouldn't be surprised if they found out there were over 10,000 people in here. No wonder the territory sent them out. Compared to others, their population growth was really very slow. After all, the location of the territory was really hidden. Most people wouldn't think of climbing mountains to find civilization, right? Putting these thoughts aside, they went straight to the slum neighborhood, which was becoming more and more derelict as the days passed. Although there were obvious attempts to hygiene, the sheer density of people made the smell unable to mask. They frowned at the increasingly obvious horrendous smell of human waste in the area. Of course, they also knew that the impact was so strong because they were used to the beautiful and clean atmosphere in Althea, and they were even more thankful to the territory for providing such a home. Squelch! Someone paused their steps and slowly looked down to see what caused the sound and the sensation, praying that whatever he was imagining was incorrect. Unfortunately, his prayers weren't heard, and he paled at the disgusting sight that was now his shoe. Fuuji, I stepped on shit. Gross. Even Rowan, who had grown up seeing this dirt, was creeped out. He was now completely an Alteran. Anyway, a lot of the people had maintained their sensitivities. They had been used to the cleanliness of Terran before, and now, in Althea, it made them extremely queasy compared to their peers. Jeez. The women outright squeaked, and some even screamed. What the heck, one man yelled, stepping away, only to step on another one. Fudj. The locals rolled their eyes. Where did these spoiled brats come from? Go away, one said. I don't know where you've been, but everyone's barely surviving, right? Did you just get transferred? In their annoyance, a lot of people missed the newcomers' new clothes and temperaments. They were struggling so much, and their brains were wired to find food, water, and their required nutrients. How could they notice these details? The Alteran group blushed a little, ashamed, but still feeling very, very grossed out. A few took an earthenware bottle out and the other a bamboo bottle, and poured water on their feet. The locals looked at them like they were murderers. Water? Why would you waste that? A cacophony of yells reached their ears, partnered by angry faces. Fearing that they'd be mobbed, the Alteran group could only escape to a less dense place before making any more plans. They definitely did not plan for this. Before heading to this place, they had imagined being mobbed by a crowd, but only because they loved their products so much. They were looking forward to being hot pancakes for a while. They would never have imagined being mobbed because they washed poop with water. Fortunately, Rowan and the others were very scary, so everyone managed to get out unscathed. Though not without stepping on a number of shit on the way there. However, no matter how torturous, they valiantly trudged through, ending up in less populous places that didn't know who they were. This time they were careful and went to the forests to wash up. They settled in another slum with a new start, now very, very careful at where they stepped on. Anyway, regardless of the horrible first impression, they still decided to start their movements with the poor population first. They had considered selling their goods near the village center, as they would definitely buy for a much higher price at first, but decided not to in the end. After all, the money-making was not the main goal of this trip. The pirating, rescue and recruitment mission was. It also gave the most rewards if done well. This was why they were focusing on the slums, at least at the start, because they would be the easiest to convince by promising a better life. This was in stark contrast with the people near the village center. Basically, those who lived near the center already invested much of their wealth in the territory. No matter how dreamlike a territory they portrayed Althea to be, they might not be willing to leave. It was a natural thing. After all, who would want to waste their wealth and just jump a leap of faith? Besides, they weren't missionaries. Who was to say they would be able to convert these people? Of course, some of them who brought in the luxuries like cloth and wooden products could sell them to these people with a huge markup. These rich people would be much more likely to be willing to spend money on comfort, as they had already met their basic needs. In this way, they could earn a contribution for recruiting the unfortunate and earn good money from the rich. It was a great strategy, and the team felt very proud of it. With renewed energy, the group went past the dense crowd and continued walking, settling in the small buffer forest between the slum area and the built area, where the horrendous stench was the least. The trio couldn't help but look around as they did so, making a mental map of the territory in their minds. The built area was located where the slums had been the last time they were here. At the very least, the construction of residential buildings had not been lax. The team took out some sheets to sit comfortably in and set up some of the food items they planned on selling. There were biscuits, breads, jerkies, dried fruits and others, and each one made the bystanders' eyes widen like saucers. In fact, the moment they wastefully took out cloth to sit on, people already took notice of them. Then they started displaying food items and people rushed in. Although they couldn't really tell what were displayed, or rather, they couldn't believe it, they couldn't help but feel excited at the sight of new things. Fortunately, the Althea guards were there to intimidate, and the people dared not to rashly approach any further. With the guards blocking, the crowd was frozen a meter or so away from where the team was setting up. Their sights were fixed on the shop being set up, eyes following every movement of the stall owners. Slowly, it dawned on them that they were indeed seeing what they were seeing. "Is that what I think it is?" Rice, a yell, "That is rice, right, although it's blue." He wasn't sure because he might just be colorblind due to excessive hunger. Biscuits, a gasp beside him sounded. Bread, came a scream. It did not end there, as a lot of others started taking out their stocks as well. If the people's eyes were wide before, now they had turned as round as saucers. Noodles, jerky, strawberry jam. The exclamation in front attracted more and more people, very curious as to what the commotion was about. One of these people was Okuri, a narrow-eyed girl with short hair. She looked at the commotion with raised eyebrows, turning her head to look at her boyfriend Ronnie. "What are they doing?" she asked, frowning. "Why are they chanting food?" She asked the man beside her, continuing her mumbling, "Are they playing a game or something?" "Did that shitty gruel finally climb up their brains?" she continued to ask. Ronnie only shook his head as his eyes stayed on the crowd, also very, very curious. Okuri naturally saw how her boyfriend's eyes stuck to a direction, and she sighed. "Shall we take a look?" she asked, and Ronnie's eyes brightened. He grabbed her hand and dragged her there, amusing Okuri. If this man could speak, maybe he'd start chanting random foods himself soon. Anyway, whether it was curiosity or fun, more and more people gathered, making the place a little more chaotic than usual. "Line up properly," a voice inside the crowd yelled, and surprisingly those up front followed religiously, making those behind even more curious. Their people were so obedient with people other than the Lord and his cronies. In any case, because the crowd in front cleared up, the things displayed soon became visible to those behind. Okuri's narrow eyes widened as much as it physically could, and she was one among many others. They finally realized that the earlier crowd weren't chanting anything, they were yelling out what they saw. The Vismont people watched in awe. Their brains couldn't believe it, but the drools dripping said their stomachs believed it. This glorious array of food they never thought they'd see again was blinding their eyes. How was this possible? In order for the guards to not drown in the crowd, the team decided to keep the selling area in a small spot for ease of guarding, with the people divided into 3 batches of sellers. The first batch was Crow's group, the former residents of Vismont. Crow's team was relatively poor, and they could only afford the more affordable food like biscuits, the cheapest bread, and processed gouji fruit like gouji jams and dried gouji. This was a small variety to them, but to the eyes of the Vismont citizens, they opened up a cornucopia, their eyes stuck in the products as if afraid they would disappear if they blinked. The paper was still under development, so the fragile biscuits were packaged in a large box made of very light local wood and sold in the wood store. When this box opened, it was like gold was revealed. The people in line immediately began asking as soon as they said they were ready. They were very disciplined, and their guards looked very strong. "How much for a box of biscuits?" 100 copper for a small box, Sonny said, raising a small box the size of a palm. The customer gulped, stomach worms causing chaos in his stomach, but then he recalled his assets and thought he ought to haggle a bit. 100 copper for a small box, he said, that's not cheap. Dog's smile was unfazed, but it's definitely worth it. They actually decided on the market price of 10 times the cost bought in Althea. Although it was not cheap, it wasn't too expensive compared to the horrid food from restaurants, so it was too worth it. Next to him, another sale was happening. "How much is this piece of bread?" "Just 50 copper, Crow said, very affordable." This one didn't even bother haggling. He was afraid someone would preempt him, so he bought a bit of everything, even if it was a little costly. A man looked at the bluish rice, which was explained thoroughly by the salesperson. "I want a bag of rice, please," one man said, and Sunny shook her head. "We can only sell half per person." "I can only buy half a kilogram." The customer frowned, repeating, hoping he heard if wrong. Sunny nodded. "That is correct, good customer. You know we can't bring too much, right? So we can only set a purchase limit. Give chance to others, right?" Like in Althea, they naturally had to place a purchase limit here. However, the majority of the reason was to avoid creating a stampede. The man pursed his lips, not reconciled. His wife and daughter were currently gathering resources in another area, and not with him. This little amount wouldn't last the 3 of them very long. However, he knew if he tried to change this rule, he'd probably get ganged up on, so he had no choice but to nod and just buy what he could. Sunny smiled in understanding and handed him his items. "Don't worry, sir, we will definitely come back and sell stuff often," she said, and her words comforted all those who heard. "Really?" Sunny grinned. "Yes, really." Next in line, an old acquaintance of theirs appeared, still looking very gentle. "Sunny," he said, really hoping to get a back door or something from acquaintances. This uncle was one of their neighbors before. They weren't friendly, but he was one of few who did not bother them. "Sorry, uncle, if you need more, you can just buy from others." Then she looked at him slyly, "Or just buy in the territory. The purchase limit is 2 kilograms per person a day." Jimmy blinked and leaned forward, interested. "Really? Much more affordable as well." At this, the man's eyes brightened, and he sat next to her to chat while she did her job. Sunny was friendly and let him do so. Anyway, their chatter also attracted a lot of curious people asking about Althea. Sunny was quite confident she was gonna get loads of contribution points. There were similar conversations next to hers. This time it was from Bull, who had a lot more money than she did. "There are strawberries here." It was a middle-aged woman, looking weathered by the winds. Her son, who had been working very hard gathering resources, liked this fruit the most. Bull saw it was a potential victim. He quickly put on a bright smile. "Some people from our territory brought seeds from Terran, so we not only have strawberries, we have soy, peanuts, watermelons, and others." Your territory, you're not from here. This time it was Okyuri who was next in line asking. She looked closely at the people. In retrospect, they should have noticed it earlier. This group of people was completely different from what she had seen since they got to this hell. These people had clean demeanors, with bright and confident smiles, like this chaos didn't bother them at all. No, we were sent by the territory to sell surplus from the territory. Surplus? That's unbelievable. People looked at each other in disbelief, while some only gaped, impressed. If true, then how amazing is that? The words of amazement, disbelief, and inquiry echoed in the area for well over an hour, and the 3 groups' items for this area had already been sold out. Those at the back of the line that were told the cutoff turned pale, already gone. When will you come back? Soon the crowd got rowdier, and some were outright mad at being unable to purchase. In fact, the guards had already told them earlier where the line ought to be cut off, but no one really left. They were probably hoping there were hidden stocks. But when no more products were taken out to be sold, the people became more and more discomforted. However, before all hell broke loose, a resounding voice, amplified by a makeshift cone amplifier, sounded. Please calm down, we may not have any more to sell right now, but we assure you our production lines have been working very hard. It was a woman named Sylvia who spoke. She was quite beautiful and curvaceous, with short auburn hair. She was a person in Mathilda's department, and was assigned to this group to handle interpersonal concerns they encountered. Hello. We are from Althea village, about half a day's walk away from here. We have created a path to go there, and we will welcome customers very much. They couldn't bluntly recruit, right? Anyway, when they visited the territory, Sylvia was confident about how it would affect all their visitors. She knew that when they got there, they probably wouldn't want to leave. After she spoke, another crowd surrounded Sylvia and asked various questions at the same time. Fortunately, Sylvia, a well-established real estate salesperson back in Terran, was unfazed by all the questions. She did not miss one question, and she did it all with a smile. It's about half a day's walk, she said, answering the person who asked how far it was. Then she turned to the concerned person who asked about safety. No, it's very safe if you have level 3s with you. During the protection period, our experts determined there should be no monsters stronger than level 3. Are you sure? Yes, our guards have been hunting kilometers away from our walls. They have yet to encounter anything stronger the past few weeks. Someone from the side asked about their water concerns. Water. Our territory is built on a water basin with a mountain spring and river. The territory built wells. How much? Only a few coppers per gallon, I believe. What? Impossible. What about food then? Another voice asked from behind her. Sylvia ignored the expressions of disbelief surrounding her and answered the other questions patiently. Food, yes, our territory has a lot of farms. Terran plants occupy about a quarter of them. Then another person asked about the visitor's rate, and Sylvia happily answered it. 5 copper is the visitor's rate, she said with a smile, and the people looked at her a little cynical in response. 5, how is that possible? Now you're just lying, lady, there's no need. Sylvia was unfazed by the questions becoming rude. Our territory believes in wealth with population, she said. Similarly, the territory requires only 3 silver for temporary residency. Seriously? What about permanent residency then? The permanent residency, it is 10 gold. We can also exchange with contribution points for half the price. Contribution points? Yes, it's a merit system of sorts. As long as you help with the growth of the territory, it is likely you'll earn some in addition to the money. Then why would people want to get permanent residency then, since the other options are so cheap? The only people who could purchase property are permanent residents. There are also added benefits such as certain amount of free resources, water, healthcare, etc. That's amazing, too amazing, one said, with a tone of questioning by the end. It is, Sylvia admitted, but you'll see the truth behind it yourself if you visit the territory. A few were questioning and disbelieving, but there were also plenty who had been softened up. What about the houses then? He asked. So what if the entries were cheap? Maybe, because the entrance was so affordable, they would have to live in even worse shanty areas there. We do not have shanty areas, Sylvia said. For those who lack money, we offer bed spaces, placed in our dormitory buildings. It is priced at a very friendly 1 copper a day. Basically, whatever came out of her mouth was a topic for passionate discussion. Surrounding her with questions and chatter, the people continued to bombard her with their concerns, certain thoughts cementing in their hearts the more they heard. It was quite lively. This was what Matthew and his cronies found after being alerted by the guards of the commotion. They were very arrogant, my lord. The other nodded. They act like they own the place. I don't know where they get their things, but it was probably nowhere good. It's better for us to take it from them. If Crow and the others would hear them, they would sneer. Typical gangsters. Matthew nodded perfunctorily, but his feet were not slow. He thought if these people could really produce all those things. They looked at the crowd gathering around, looking all bright and excited. It was at this time that they heard more than one people say, "Can we go back with you?" The guards paled and cursed, catching the attention of a few people nearby. Someone saw the lord and felt a little guilty. "My lord, they meant to go there to buy things, don't misunderstand." He said, expression calm and unchanging, not knowing what he was thinking. Because of the noise, the people in the main crowd still did not take note of their existence. The guards felt appalled and offended, and they quickly shouted for attention. "Ungrateful, a little food and you all grovel like dogs." The people's eyes widened, and their heads tilt down unconsciously, either feeling guilty for the lord or afraid of the guards. No, my lord, you've misunderstood. We plan to buy from this territory to bring to ours." "Yes, my lord, now that these delicious things are available, we can finally eat better." Matthew nodded at them and smiled. "Of course I understand," he said. "I came here to start a trading deal with these people." Hearing this, the terrified looks on their faces morphed to one of amazement. The Lord is wise, as always. Our Lord will always have great foresight. Matthew gave out a seemingly embarrassed smile, turning his head to the foreigners. Matthew's eyes landed on the woman in the middle of the crowd, then on the hint of crimson among the people. He was very visible because he was very tall and had very striking colors. Matthew's eyebrows rose when he saw the person and his crimson hair and pupils. Someone could still wear contact lenses in this situation. He approached the tall man, who was obviously the leader of his group. "Can I ask where you are from?" Rowan was standing still with arms crossed, ready to take action in the slightest sign of chaos. He didn't appreciate the interruption to his job, but he realized it was the lord of the territory, and by instinct, he became a little more respectful. "We are from a village called Althea, a territory half a day's walk east of here," was all he said before turning his head away, doing his job. The guards beside him glared but didn't do anything. Fortunately, Sylvia was sharp and had seen the interaction. Sylvia stepped in at this time, with a smile on her face. "We have come here to broker deals with various individuals in hopes of livening our economy," she said, cannot help but look at the handsome man and his long-sleeved turtle neck. Sylvia could see that his current wear was made from an older shirt, too, like it was refitted to appear so. He seemed to wear this type of outfit all the time, was he not hot? "We have various production lines, and while citizens have purchase limits set for individuals, our territory can make separate discussions with larger entities like territories." "Well, who can I talk to about this deal?" Sylvia nodded. "It's me." Matthew signaled for her to chat in a different area. Before they separated for a more private chat, he couldn't help but look at the flaming red hair of the person near them, a person whom his guards seemed to be terrified of. This must be the guy who crushed the guards at the entrance. He stopped walking when they went past the man and asked, "Which place is this sir from? I mean in Terran." He thought he'd have a better idea about him if he found this out. "I'm not from Terran, Lord," Rowan said, stoic, but habitually quite respectful. "What?" Rowan looked at him with raised eyebrows, repeating, "I'm not from Terran, Lord." Matthew's eyes widened a little. "Not from Terran, then where would he be from?" "This place. An aborigine. Bright Village." At this time, the southbound group had also arrived, and was setting up their area. It took them a while to get there because of a monster mob, which amounted to about 100, delaying their arrival. They were a relatively big group, but the territory had been seeing influx after influx of refugees, so they, except for their handsomeness, didn't capture much attention when they arrived. Ansel and his team eventually got to their target location, finding a place in the makeshift marketplace in front of the village center shortly after. "Where do we go to meet the Lord?" Jun asked Ansel, the former visitor of this territory. Unlike Vismont Village, which they didn't really care for, Bright was a much more decent village, somewhat worthy of partnership. Ansel smirked. "Just sell as planned. If he has any brains, he'll come to us himself." Jun was silent for a moment, then thought it made sense. Hence, he just asked the team to settle down in an area, with the few guards surrounding the place. The grand positioning made the people around, who were selling either fruits or meat, stare at them. "So much spaz," one said, biting off a nearly overripe fruit he couldn't sell. Anyway, dinner shopping would begin soon. People here had developed a habit of consuming fruit with the horrid gruel or bread to make it more palatable. "Heh, they're so confident," he said. "They must have foraged something new." The person who spoke was a stall owner in the store next to him. It also happened to be the popular store, the barbecue stall. Although the meat he prepared couldn't compare with what they were used to, he still managed to soften it and add a good combination of fruits to make it relatively edible. "Well, they carry big bags, means it doesn't fit in their space anymore, right?" The others shrugged, not really expecting much. It was just that a minute later, their eyes almost fell. They watched as the small group unpacked their things from boxes. Rice, flour jars, and others were revealed, and those who saw had their feet moving on their own. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. It was only after staring, and then asking, then staring again did they finally believed it. They didn't know how all these things got here, some even assuming someone brought them from Terran, so they knew the price would naturally not be cheap. Someone finally stepped forward and asked someone who had been arranging his stall, "Are you, by some chance, selling these?" As soon as the person nodded, the surroundings basically exploded with a cacophony of noises. "I want all this rice," the person said, opening his arms wide to make his point. The people around glared at him, ready to fight as soon as he uttered his words. The salesperson's lips twitched. "We only sell 1/2 kilo per person, sorry." "Fine, sell me everything I can buy," he said, waving around his silver and eventually getting some. He pointed at the other things in the shal as well. "Get me this loaf of bread and jam." "Me, don't forget me, I want instant noodles," another one said, buying several things he could afford. "I want this bolt of jerky," a newcomer yelled, "and also some rice." "Hey, don't push." "I'm not. Instant noodles, please." "Wow, so many flavors, I wonder how it tastes." "Anything is better than restaurant food," a voice from beside him said, and the people around couldn't help but nod in agreement. "That's true. As a certified foodie, I can tell these are legit." The quick ones managed to get a bit of everything, and they handled it as if they were treasure, immediately placing it in the space for protection. It was very busy and a bit haggard, but every Alteran had a smile on their faces. The group of them made over 10 times their investment. Ansel himself, who got the best deal, made scores and scores of gold within the first hour. If it wasn't for the contribution, most people would have loved to just make money this way, but who told the territory to need more people? Soon, only a bit of food was left. Ansel saw that there were still hundreds of people behind who looked anxiously at them. If the guards weren't intimidating, especially with Drake and Hugo who were at level 5, there would have been a stampede by now. "We only have a bit left of food, sorry," Jun said, and looked at their pale, disappointed faces with a faux guilty smile. "We can just go back every few days to trade you some, or just buy it from our territory. We can definitely accommodate your needs." A lot of people looked at him with hopeful looks, but, as it always was, some people were not reconciled and immediately started imposing what they wanted. "But this food is something I must have," he said. "I'm willing to pay twice these people." A regal man, a dozen people behind the line, yelled to them. Jun's eyebrows rose and looked at the man. Although he didn't look very clean, he was still better put out than most people. With his lead, more people started bidding. Jun shook his head at the other Alterans, stopping them from accepting immediately. However, it wasn't that he was against it. He knew that even if they insisted on selling their market price to the next guy, these people would just offer to bid with the people who managed to get the product. Unlike the Alterans, however, These people might even get a little hurt since they didn't have any guards. Jun paused in thought. He didn't want chaos, but he didn't want to inflate the value too much. It would go against his personal creed as a former public servant to do so. In the end, he decided to just set the price a little higher. We will not auction these off, as they are just commodities in our territory. We will only temporarily increase the price by 2, and if those in line are still willing to buy, then we will sell. As if afraid to be preempted, the people in front of the line quickly answered, "Yes, yes, I am willing." "Me too, me too." Seeing that those in front took the deal with no exceptions, the relatively richer people at the back frowned. Some of their relatively entitled attitudes still existed. They obviously had money. Why couldn't they get the things they used to take for granted? They need these things, how do they get it? Jun naturally saw the depression nearby, pausing in thought. In order not to make a bigger commotion, he asked another person to separate and make another stall. This person happened to be Ansel, who got the best deals by virtue of being the relative of the owner, accompanied by a few better-off fellows. But Ansel enjoyed the crowd more, so he got an assistant to sell his stuff for him. Opening their spaces, he transferred some of the items to the other's space without revealing anything to the outside world. Of course, such remote transfers also cost some money, but they were really a hassle to carry. Seeing that the goods were settled, Jun turned to look at the rich crowd simmering in impatience. "We may no longer have a lot of food products available, but we do have items for luxury, still expensive even in our territory because the production isn't mature yet. For those who have currency in gold, please come with me." The hopeless people at the back brightened and followed. There were surprisingly more than 100 people who still had a lot of surplus gold coins. This stall was much more peaceful and only needed a few guards, and the crowd was only because there were still a lot of curious bystanders. The privilege made the rich customers stick out their chest, a little proud. But then the items to be sold were revealed. They flinched and someone even coughed violently when they saw the new items being offered, and they immediately lost their bearing. Bolts of fabric in several colors, as well as sewing kits, were taken out, and it made these people's eyes widen. You must know that while they were much better off than others, they were almost the same in terms of how unsightly their clothes were. At best, they could only wash it more than others. Leather could be done, but it was too hot and uncomfortable. But now they see bolts of cloth. "We are selling a bolt of cotton, 1 meter width and 3 meters in length, for a lump sum of 5 gold each," the salesman said with a smile. "Hemp cloth as well, albeit a lump only costs 80 silver per bolt." Then he showed a wooden box opening to show a few spools of threads and needles. "For now, we offer 2 thread weights for each available color and different needle sizes and types. We will soon offer threads and needles for crocheting, quilting, and the like. This particular sewing kit cost 10 silver. Metal was still difficult, so the needles for now were made of beast bones, delicately carved by their artisans. These people did not even hesitate and paid immediately, afraid that they'd lose stocks again. Those who bought handled the cotton and saw the quality was not bad. One of the customers, advanced in age, was particularly more noticeable because the way he checked fabric reeked of expertise. Jun's eyes couldn't help but follow the man as he got out of the crowd to go somewhere less dense. He gently unrolled the 2 bolts, one was allowed for cotton and 2 for hemp. The man's fingers traced its texture feeling for any irregularities. He looked closely for any imperfections, and he checked for the consistency of the weave. He also lifted it to check its weight and density, and pretty much stuck his eyes on the fabric to see the selvage and the edges. With an unchanged expression, he waved them to see how fabric draped and fell. He nodded, seeming satisfied with how the fabric held its shape. Finally, he held it against the light to see its translucency. The man's eyebrows rose, he combed back his white hair and gaped at the items. Naturally, the quality could not compare to Terran's, but he didn't even expect to see anything of the type so soon. His name was Andre, and he used to be a well-known fashion designer back in Terran. He naturally knew about this stuff. "But more importantly, you mentioned that you produce these." He darted back to the crowd and asked the salesperson in disbelief. "Yes, when we left, the first batch of cotton had just matured, and the machines had only been completed, so we bought this for a relatively high price." Andre found this a bit unbelievable. Their side was still obviously struggling with the basics, but someone else was already producing luxuries. As someone who had been a refugee, he had thought Bright was already very good. But alas, there was no harm without comparison. Anyway, he bought the maximum allowed purchase of 3 bolts and a set of sewing paraphernalia. The others bought 1 or 2, especially after finding out the price would be lowered when the technology developed. After these were done, the next set of items was revealed, causing wild chattering of the spectators. The group revealed items like larger jars of condiments and earthenware, also sold in gold. Because the team sold condiments and sauces in larger containers to save space, the condiments and sauces were sold in jars. Soy sauce. Chili. Is that ready mix? Curry flavor, sour soup flavor. Ansel smiled and looked at his companions. Together, they took small earthenware saucers and took a bit of each, handing them to their customers to let them have a taste. The people looked at each other, gaping. Oh my gosh. These are legit. How? What could this mean? It meant they could start cooking delicacies again. This naturally led to a bidding war, which Jun allowed this time. What was more, he actually decided to sell a vat of each in a set. After all, taking this amount was enough to make a business out of it. If the people who managed to buy could actually cook, they could get a return of investment within a few days. As he watched the bidding war going, old fabulous Andre couldn't help but gape. This is amazing, Andre mumbled, and those beside him nodded very passionately. As they appreciated the goods, they couldn't help but take second look at the sellers, which they belatedly realized to be so much cleaner and happier than anyone else. But what they were more curious about was the territory that could produce all these and make these people so satisfied with their lives. Such a territory, within a few weeks, managed to revive cultures they thought they'd lose forever, preserving technology they thought they had lost. So they were just very, very curious. What kind of territory was this, Althea? Back in the food area, Ansel was selling jerky with a smile on his face, making the girl buying blush as red as a tomato. He smiled, chuckling, which just made the girl flush even deeper. This was a very good customer who purchased everything to the purchase limit, so Ansel was obviously very kind. Here you go, he said, handing her the hemp bag with a winning smile, and the girl looked at him in a daze. Yes, Be sure to check out our territory, okay? It's lovely there, almost as lovely as you. Eyes, okay. Jun, who had just returned to this side, almost rolled his eyes and just smiled at the person next in line, who had been getting annoyed by the delays up front. Hello, dear customer, Jun said to the person, pulling the girl out of her daze. Realizing her gaffe, she flinched and quickly excused herself to leave. Of course, this was not without looking back wistfully in Ansel's direction. Ansel did not see this, however, as he had already shifted his focus to the next customer. How may we help you today? The person nodded and also bought to the maximum allowable purchase. A little of everything, please, to the maximum we could get. Okay, please note that all items are at twice the original selling price. The man nodded, manifesting several golds. No problem. Jun smiled cordially and organized the items they would be selling. There were no more biscuits and bread, but there was still a bit of the others like rice and condiments. This purchase made those behind very tense. The sale continued until they reached the last batches, with some items getting looted faster than others. There's no more strawberry jam. A familiar soft but manly voice sounded in his ears, and Ansel turned his head to its source. It was Tom, looking very disappointed, staring at the empty blanket on another one of their makeshift stalls in despair. Because Ansel was on the other side of the store, covered by other vendors, and there was also the fact that the older man's attention had always been fixed on the items below, Tom didn't notice him there at all. Ansel smirked and stood up, asking his neighbor to sell the remaining bits for him, and walked beside the older man. Because he was wallowing in grief, Tom did not notice his approach until he felt a pat on his shoulder. Absent-mindedly, Tom turned his head to be met with familiar peach blossom eyes. Tom gasped in surprise at the sight of the handsome lad that he didn't think he'd see again so soon. Ansel rolled his eyes at his daze. Come with me, he said, and it was just then that Tom was pulled back to reality. Ansel, you're back. But before he could celebrate, Tom's shoulder slumped, looking at him filled with pity. Ansel's eyes twitched. What was this guy thinking this time? Tom's initial thought was that Ansel didn't find his sister and suffered a bit outside. Unable to hold up, he came back. In despair, he followed the crowd, and thus their fates reconnected. Tom was already thinking about how to feed him. He then patted the man's shoulders. "It'll be fine, I'll support you." Ansel's eyes twitched, realizing what was going on in this guy's head. "Look closer, big guy," Ansel said, and Tom blinked, finally doing so. Very quickly, he realized that he thought too much. Tom took a second look at his old friend and sized him up, surprised at what he was seeing. He was obviously much more filled up, whiter, and cleaner than when he left, right? "You," was all he could say, puzzled by how this could be. How long has it been? Why was he so different? He couldn't help but look at the well-fitting garments with leather clothing on his body. Tom had been with him for most of the time back in Terran. He did not have time to get these clothes. Ansel smirked proudly. "My sister gave it to me, Tilda." He also looked so smug that if Tom wasn't such a mild-mannered guy, he'd want to punch him. But how nice, he was happy for him. "Well, it's good that you found your sister," was all he said, very polite, but he was also very envious. He wondered where his brother's family was. Shaking his head of the thoughts, he pulled himself back with a smile. There was no use worrying now. He could only do his best to strengthen himself so he could support and protect them when they found each other. The duo weaved through the crowd, and looking back, Tom couldn't help but feel emotional again. "It's a pity I wasn't able to buy those things." His strawberry. Ansel rolled his eyes. "This idiot, didn't you see what direction I came from?" Tom stared at him, puzzled, and Ansel pointed his thumb back to the store not far away. It took a moment, but it did dawn on him, and the middle-aged man gaped as soon as it did so. "You came with them." Tom paused and gulped at a realization. "Then you." Ansel nodded. "I'm making a private sale." "Why do you mean?" Ansel looked up in exasperation. "Do you want to buy my products or not?" Tom almost cried. His favorite strawberry jam was in reach. Character Interaction Corner. ANSEL Edition. Ansel, we meet up with old friends. We will also meet more next chapter. They're not friends, though. Author, time for the interview. Ansel, oh yes, Ms. Author, shoot away. Author, what is the bestseller? Ansel, everything sells well. But if I were to point out what the resource-scarce people bought, it's mostly the bread and biscuits. Author, makes sense if they didn't have their own kitchen to cook. Ansel, some also buy condiments, so the meat they have on hand tastes better. Author, if you're in their position, what would you buy? Ansel, hair gel. Author, seriously? Ansel, the resources could come later, I look very good. Author, looks at Althea, look at this thing you raised. Althea, my baby brother is adorable, whatever he does. The duo had finally gotten out of the crowd a few minutes of struggle later, with Tom stopping himself from asking any details, lest they be overheard and cause Ansel trouble. However, they didn't get far before another voice called out to Ansel, with a very familiar tone of voice. Ansel's eyes twitched. He didn't seem to have female friends, and or exes with such a high-pitched tone of voice, right? Ansel, the voice called again when she saw that they didn't pay attention. The two men turned their heads to see two women approaching them, with big, relieved smiles on their faces. If others saw, they'd think they were old friends, or something that finally found each other after suffering great wrongs. Ansel recognized them as Nanny's daughter and the showy woman who called herself their neighbor. Looking at the two women, Ansel could see that the environment obviously took a toll on them. Their faces had lost their previous smoothness, their clothing was well kept but poor quality due to circumstance, and their skins had gotten rough and dark. Despite all these changes, their core was the same. One was as haughty as ever, while the other one stood a step behind her as if willingly serving as foil. Of course, Ansel's experienced eyes told him she was doing the exact opposite. He could even sense some low-key goading of the other woman to encourage the other to act like a spoiled brat. It didn't help that the peacock woman, aka Ramona, was really a spoiled brat that magically still hadn't been fixed by the apocalypse and the migration. She did not hide the greed in her eyes when she saw him. which crept Ansel and Tom, who wasn't even the target, very much. Ansel, she repeated when he didn't answer, assuming he simply didn't hear, eyes ogling him maniacally. Ansel was still as handsome as ever, Ramona thought greedily, and he was even cleaner than when they last saw him. Not to mention, compared to the sorry state of everyone right now, Ansel was a massive light in the darkness. Her gossipy nature also informed her that Ansel was among the people who brought all these goods here. Not only did they bring food and condiments, but they also brought fabric. She definitely can't miss him, she thought strongly, thinking of various ways to get Ansel to take her with him. Ramona at this time was getting desperate. Since they got here, she had been trying to attach herself to Mitchell, at least get attached to any one of his confidants. Unfortunately, she had no luck for a while and had no choice but to settle with the lowest-ranked people amongst the Lord's party, a plain-looking musclehead named Paulie. She couldn't help but send a furtive sideways glance at the woman beside her. She did not have any luck, but for some mysterious reason, this woman did. Ramona didn't know how she did it, but she managed to snag someone from the Lord's inner circle, a man named Jingo, who was in charge of the Lord's treasury. He was not very handsome, and a little older than they were, but the Lord's decisions on where to place his money had a lot to do with this guy. It was not an exaggeration to say he held the most power next to the Lord himself. But looking at the lively stalls, Ramona sneered. So what if you had money? What was money if you couldn't even eat a decent meal? She had had enough of all those bland food. At this thought, her stare at Ansel got even hotter. "You're back?" she asked with a smile she thought was sexy. Ansel only nodded and gestured to walk away when Sandra beside her spoke. "Althea, how is she?" she asked, appearing truly concerned. "HMN," Ansel responded and turned to her. He was still polite to Sandra. After all, it was her direction that led him to Althea. "I found her," he said, "thanks to you." He then handed her a small basket with a little of everything, one of his offerings, the food set. Sandra blushed and was very flattered by the gift, while Ramona frowned in jealousy. "This basket is actually a product from her industry. She's doing very well," he said. "You know her field. She's like a fish thrown into the water now." Ansel took a deep look at the woman, pretending not to see her stiffened stance. She was among the first citizens there, and it was the first territory she settled in. She barely suffered. Sandra gripped the basket when he heard how Althea was. It was even her first territory. She didn't suffer at all. Most importantly, she was the one behind these items. How? Why? She must still be so beautiful, right? Ansel sneered when he saw the reaction she thought she was hiding well, politely excused himself, and led Tom to go on their way. Ansel and Tom didn't get far when he stopped walking. Tom was a little puzzled until the redhead turned to a direction with an unreadable smile. Ansel stared back at another familiar face, staring at him. It was none other than the territory lord, Mitchell, as well put as always. He was standing still and poised, with a few of his guards and cronies beside him. Interestingly, some of these guards were familiar. It was Bruce and Artie, now guards, who were also pleasantly surprised at the sight of him. They didn't break character and run to him, of course, but the brightness in their eyes was welcoming enough. Ansel smiled back, happy for them. He also saw how hard they worked for this back then, and was glad they'd gotten the opportunity. Mitchell looked at him, and then to the Ultron team not far away. The man then sent a deep, unfathomable look, but that same smile was plastered on his face. Mitchell walked over to him, stopping just over a meter away. "Shall we talk?" Ansel gave him a knowing look and smirked. "Gladly." The group settled down in a meeting hall built beside the village center. It was a little crude with thatch as roofing, unlike tiled ones in Altera, but it was a good enough enclosure, considering the length of time they've been here and the resources they had. The room also had some simple furniture like chairs, tables, and the like, which was actually quite impressive, especially if one hadn't stepped into Altera yet. The entire space had about 200 square meters in floor area. There was a large centerpiece table smack in the middle, surrounded by a dozen chairs arrayed at equal distances. There were also some chairs set flush along the walls, probably for audiences like their assistants. It was an obvious meeting room, flexible to add audiences as needed, and it looked like a crude, small but usable plenary hall. Ansel nodded. Compared to other territories, Bright was definitely one of the better ones. He mused that there should also be a construction team here, as well as someone who had some knowledge of politics. "Sit down, please," Mitchell said, gesturing towards chairs. He politely didn't sit down until the guests did so. There were two groups in this meeting, local and Alterans. The Alterans were only him, Jun, and Drake, with the others closing up the business outside. The locals, on the other hand, naturally had a lot more people. There were about 10 of them, including the two women. The two women, Ramona and Sandra, managed to come in view of their men. Well, Sandra did. Ramona's man wasn't even there. She got in holding Sandra. As everyone was settling down, Michael opened some small talk. "Have you found your siblings?" Ansel nodded. "Partially, I found my sister, thank you for asking." Ansel responded with similar politeness. "She's living with me in the territory now." "Oh, how well?" Mitchell asked, and when he realized the question was a little inappropriate, he added, "I overheard what you told them." He nodded his head to the two women, who were listening eagerly to his question. Ansel smiled, quite proud of his sister's achievements. "Well, she's living in her own villa there and is eating well every day." Mitchell nodded. "That's great to hear. I heard that the thriving food industry in your territory had a lot to do with her as well." "My sister is very good with plants. She found some indigenous plants and studied their use." Ansel paused. "She and her team found a way to make some of the familiar products from indigenous items like what you saw today, and rented farms for mass production." Mitchell and the others couldn't help but remember, with some longing, the products circulating. They also bought out a lot of citizens for a very high price. It was Jingo who spoke next. "It's unfortunate we cannot purchase farms," he said. "The territory bought a village center, a weapons store, an armory, the walls, and the residences. After leveling up, they purchased the well and the warehouse. This wasn't a bad decision at all, because the resources were lush in this place. Although the food wasn't enjoyable, no one would starve. However, it doesn't mean we cannot farm on our own," Mitchell said, comforting. "We could build edifices, why not till the land for agriculture?" The people on his side nodded, enlightened, and were relieved. Then it was Bruno who spoke out his concerns. Bruno was Mitchell's primary person in the military and security aspects of the territory. "My lord, would they tell us information about the plants?" A few of his cronies nodded, having the same concern. "The people we lost due to poisoning are not few. After all, there were so many of them. The resources within the walls were sometimes not enough. A lot of people, especially those with not much money, would tend to venture outside to forage." Mitchell heard their questions and turned to Ansel, silently asking for his response. The redhead crossed his arms with a smile. "Everyone in our territory is aware of which plants nearby are poisonous and which ones are usable," he said. "I'm no botanist, so it can't come from me. You just have to visit our place. Our people would likely share knowledge with you." The citizens of Bright looked a little surprised, but not too much. After all, they were all from one place, and sharing this knowledge wouldn't hurt Alter at all, so they were only thankful. The NPC guard Juno, on the other hand, looked at them with cynicism, because he grew up thinking very differently. Juno was a tall, handsome man with unusual dark green hair, cut very short. In his culture, people had to go through fire first, before getting such important knowledge from another person. So most of him would be guarded. He was even thinking that this could be a trap to lure the Lord out of his territory. But looking at the Lord having a sincere discussion about this, he dared not speak out. Regardless, he would just have to increase his vigilance, and just do his job and protect the Lord here. As his mind listened to the discussion, his honey-colored eyes couldn't help but give the Lord a furtive glance. For better or for worse, this was a Lord he was starting to sincerely admire. He was unique, unlike the other lords he served. He was strong, but he was also kind. He didn't have the pompousness of nobles at all. Mitchell felt his stare and turned his head, making the NPC flinch a little. He nodded as if to reassure him, and the NPC couldn't help but blush a bit in embarrassment. Mitchell did not see this. Instead, he returned his attention to the red head in front of him. Thinking of plants and crops, as well as what they had been producing so far, Mitchell couldn't help but voice out his admiration. "It is amazing. It's great that she also found plants similar to Terran." Ansel shook his head. "While there are indeed some similar plants, a lot of the familiar plants you saw really were from Terran," he said, making the others stare at him. His lips rose upwards, and he looked a bit smug. "You see, she also brought in seeds from our planet." Everyone else at the table flinched. What? Their eyes twitched. Everyone only had a cubic meter of space. There was so much they had to pack. Food, water, and clothing would have filled the space in no time. No one would think of going out of their way to get seeds, right? Well, apparently not this guy's sister. And looking at his smug, punchable face, the decision served them very well. He still looked a bit spoiled by her. Envy. Mitchell cleared his throat, repeating his words as if to confirm. She brought in Terran plants. Yes, she already rented several farms dedicated to them. There was silence for a while before the Lord broke it, with his back resting on his chair, losing a little of his composure. Your sister is amazing. Most people really won't think of this direction. Even he, who had a lot of resources at his disposal, thought to fill his space with weapons and basic supplies. Well, she's a bit obsessed, Ansel said with an awkward but fond smile. Anything his sister did was cute and logical. If it wasn't, the world was wrong. Well, it improved the lives of the people in your territory, Mitchell told him. This alone makes her a hero. Of course, he agreed very strongly. Not only in the territory, other people would also enjoy the benefits very soon. Mitchell was extremely interested and excited, although he maintained a cool facade. He leaned down and placed his elbow on the table, placing his hands together. So, if we hope to make a deal, what would your sister say? Ansel mirrored his body language, smiling. She gave me full power on this. Okay, good. 2 hours later. You are very good, Mitchell said, extending his hand for a handshake. However, if one knew him well enough, one would see his expression was a bit darker than usual. Ansel was very smug. Even though he was young, he was told by everyone he was a very skilled businessman. Mitchell was not easy either, and there were times that he felt an invisible dagger threaten him. But who told him to have all the cards? So Mitchell had to succumb, buying a fixed amount for 100% more than the Alteran market price. They also had to pick up the goods themselves. Althea had said that non-residents would have to buy goods in the territory for at least thrice the price, even more for the luxury items, so this was not a bad deal at all. What actually irked Mitchell was the fact that he had to let go of 5 construction talents for every month the deal was in effect. Then he would let them work in Altera for free for that month. That was, he'd be paying these talents salaries. Mitchell was dark just thinking about it, his calm but sharp stare targeting the redhead whose face was so happy and proud that everyone on his side wanted to punch him. Ansel naturally felt it, but he was feeling too accomplished to care. He got them more construction talents tilde. Althea had told him that after the territory was upgraded again, the land would be 4 times as large, maybe even larger. They would really need these talents. Anyway, they didn't have to worry about corporate spies or anything because the contracts in the village center were very strict. Your sister is very kind to give her territory this convenience when it is her items being sold, Mitchell said, looking at the other man with unknown thoughts. Ansel's lips twitched. Of course, he said, she's one of the designated elders there. This is basically the head of a department. Oh, Jingo asked, very curious. They too had built a little government, but they called them department heads, who assigned that if there was no lord. The system, Ansel said, shrugging. Notifications just appeared in front of them or something. The other party continued to ask questions, obviously trying to find out more about Altera. Similarly, during those 2 hours of discussion, Ansel also found quite a bit of things about the other party. For example, like Altera, the Bright Territory was also widely invested in construction, using money to buy resources to build houses, restaurants, and wells. Mitchell could tell that Altera was even more adamant in this, and he was very curious about what they had built so far, as Ansel was being vague, obviously telling him to see it for himself. Another piece of information he got was that Bright's village center was also upgraded a few days back. It happened that the first talent Mitchell took fancy to was a builder. In Bright, the manual construction in the territory focused the types outside the system. For example, the government office that they were now in. Although they were simple buildings, they met certain needs of the territory and were already much better than most territories on the same level. Better, just yesterday, Mitchell got the news that someone triggered the life occupation of builder. This was really good news as he was in dire need of talents and occupations. His population was several thousands of people, but not many had triggered the skills. Even the village center wasn't particularly reliable regarding this. On the second day of leveling up the village center, he won a level E guard, the green-haired Juno next to him, but there were no special hires after that. After many days, he finally settled with a no-rank cook yesterday. There had been no useful ones since then, and sometimes he felt the hiring function whetted the appetite with good talents only at the beginning. Then, after making the lords curious and spending silver every day, the hiring function would leave them hanging. Mitchell sighed, feeling it to be a pity, before he returned to the present. His eyes met the arrogant Ansel's, and he couldn't help but think a bit deeper. Among many other things, Mitchell was also very curious about the kind of territory the great Althea Witt, Mathilda Cruz, and Professor Grubeinman were so dedicated to. "It seems like I have to visit your territory soon," he said. "You should. You would definitely be enlightened. You are very confident." "Always." Without any more words, the two headed to the village center some time later. Under the witness of their cohorts and many citizens of Bright, the two went to a platform and opened a contract. They raised their hands, as if registering their fingerprints, and a small light enveloped the two of them, immediately bursting like a bubble a second later. This marked the beginning of Altera Village's first successful inter-territory partnership. Back to Altera, Althea was going around handling her industries, preparing as much as she could before the hundreds, if not thousands, of people arrived. She had already planned for the expansion of the factories, as well as scheduled the hiring of more labor force. She also scheduled a lot more factories for the various new needs of the territory. For instance, there would come a time when Lenny's workshop could no longer fit in the fabric factory. This would be especially true when the commercial space she got for her was opened. As such, a factory would be dedicated to Lenny. They would be focusing on more common clothing and undergarments, and the rest of that market would be left to the citizens. In terms of residences, the current dormitories and residences would be able to swallow the newcomers. However, she did have to prepare well for the inevitable future expansion of the residential areas. Anyway, the land after the upgrade would increase by folds, but she didn't know exactly how it would change after that. The NPCs mentioned that the expansion of the territory sometimes was not straightforwardly radiant. Some were elongated, so she didn't stress on the premature planning because of this. There were also other aspects that needed to be perfected, like policies that would be applicable to tens of thousands of population. For instance, traffic, another security. The more people there were, the more bad apples there would be. This was an inevitable fact she needed to address. Speaking of this, she decided to look at the loyalties of her citizens, in case she already had a bad apple around. She looked at the Citizens tab for the first time since the monster mob. She found the lowest loyalties for now was 50%. HM not bad, she said, and this meant she was still relatively problem-free in this area, for now anyway. She looked at the other stats as well, and, to her surprise, she found that there were also more and more people who triggered life occupations. There were more woodworkers, farmers, and builders, dozens of them. It could be said that the peacefulness and prosperity of the territory inspired and gave time to a lot of people, allowing them to trigger these occupations that otherwise would have taken much longer. Anyway, this would allow her territory to be built faster, a necessity for her territory that wished to develop as much as possible before they faced the dangerous world outside. Above all of these, of course, she knew that one of the first things she had developed well was the military force. Fortunately, even with her lack of talent in the area, the people assigned to this aspect were all very responsible, knowledgeable, and passionate about their job. There were also more fighting occupations like swordsmen, shieldsmen, spearmen, and archers. People with these occupations had received some skills, a few more than others. For example, Helios and Hugo received 3 skills each as soon as they activated their professions, while some only had 1. Regardless of whether it was 1 or 3 skills, however, she had no doubt that the training hall had a great contribution to this. After all, the monsters outside had become relatively weaker to them, triggering fighting occupations that needed life and death experiences. The training hall somewhat managed to fill up this gap, to a certain degree. The countdown to the end of the protection period had begun, and what were all these riches and conveniences if they couldn't protect it? On the contrary, it would become a favorite target of more powerful territories instead. Although she would only be against village-level territories, the indigenous villages of this world had average levels of about 10 or so. This was twice what their own level forecast was. Now that their levels started to stagnate at an average level of 5, Althea had no choice but to develop weaponry and defense even more. Although Drake and Rowan weren't here at this time, they had made sure everything was in order, so their policies were strictly followed by the more than 100 of the remaining guards. She watched as the barracks used a mixture of training methods from Xeno and from Terran, each of which complemented the other. Speaking of methodology and technique, Drake and Rowan were also surprisingly compatible with each other. Drake trained the guards' physical and reaction times, while Rowan trained a more subtle quality, something he called spirituality, that was supposed to solidify the foundation of elementalists. It was a very subtle technique that was incredibly difficult to understand if one hadn't awakened yet, but not entirely impossible to practice. It was like meditation, but more yearning for an outside force. Althea had tried it, and although she hadn't awakened yet, her instinct told her the exercise was useful. She and the others in her team made it a point to turn this spirituality training into a habit, done at least an hour every day. Perhaps this would solidify their foundation and make it easier for them to practice the elements when the time came. Returning to the present, she walked down to the training ground, joining the hardworking men. "How are you?" Miss Althea, the guards greeted the elder warmly. Their looks were with traces of affection and with massive amounts of admiration. This was a strong woman who was responsible for why their stomachs were always filled and satisfied, the woman who had affected their current lifestyles the most. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone who knew her achievements knew she was pivotal in the development of this territory. It was Reno, Drake's right-hand man, who stood forward to answer her question. The lowest level of the guards is level 3, Ms. Althea, and most of them are already level 4. With the help of the training hall, the average should be at level 5 by the time the protection period ends. This was one of the main items for reporting to the higher-ups every few days. It was obvious how seriously they took it. He heard the elders jointly requested to increase the free benefit time of the training hall to their guard team for this purpose. What about combat capability? A level 3 can now take on a level 3 monster, one-on-one, without sustaining damage, Miss Althea. She nodded, pretty eyes following the movements of the hard-working guards. Although the level was low compared to those villages outside, how many fighters could fight against the same leveled monsters one-on-one? She doubted there was a lot. "Announce it to your guards," she said, emerald eyes not leaving her persevering guards. She ought to inspire them a bit more and push them a few more steps forward. For every upgrade to level 5, a guard is entitled to 10 kilograms of rice, a big packet of instant noodles, a big packet of biscuits, a 1-liter jar of processed meat, and 3 small jars of any condiment of their choice. The guards who were low-key eavesdropping nearby widened their eyes, hyped, and lost their subtlety. They stopped whatever they were doing and stared, making sure what she said would really be implemented. This was big. That amount of food was more than enough to feed a big person for a month. The beautiful elder was so generous. "I'm expecting more level 5s soon," she said with a smile, and the guards almost saluted. "Yes, miss, thank you." If there was something that measured her personal prestige, her already high value would have skyrocketed even more. Dragon Team Barracks a few years prior. It was night time, and the military barracks laid in peaceful silence, now relatively empty as most soldiers were already preparing to rest. One area, though, remained filled with activity. Continuous gunshots echoed across the semi-open air shooting range, particularly audible amongst the quiet fields surrounded by dense forests. The one holding the gun had soft, delicate hands, and she was supported from the recoil by strong arms flushed behind her. These same strong arms held up her supple arms, keeping them stable and in position. After shooting, she narrowed her eyes at the target brought back by the carrier. Her hit rates ranged from 6 to 8 points, and she frowned. She had been here for so long, why was her accuracy so low? She pouted and looked at the man behind her. So bad. Garen chuckled and leaned down to kiss her head. "You are already doing very well, my love." "Really? Really?" Althea's mood turned up and she looked at the gun in her hand again. It felt really powerful. No wonder men loved it so much. "Well, I hope you'd never have to use it," he said, leaning down to peck at her lips. Althea smiled, closing her eyes to receive his chaste kiss. I know, she told him. That's why you do your best at your job, so that I can study my plants with a peace of mind. Garen chuckled, wrapping his strong arms around her, and she relished in his warmth. Well, my wife is amazing. She pinched his cheeks. We're not married yet. Gatton smiled, kissing her naughty hand on his face. Not for long. Althea village, present. After a short chat with the soldiers, Althea then proceeded to go to the newly minted weapons and armory factory, refurbished from one of the newly built buildings in the industrial area. On paper, this factory was expropriated by the territory to be used as a weapons factory. It was located next to the kiln and had better security compared to the others. This area was where the weapons and armor would be mass-produced. After so long, Brenda and the others determined that, except for the productivity buff, they could do everything else in the factory, considering they had relatively advanced machines, for Xeno anyway. It functioned like a combined armory and weapons store, albeit focusing only on production. All artisans and creators also had their own large workspaces, and they also added water wheels for their machines, as needed. It could be said that the territory invested a lot in this. As an elder, she was one of the people with access to this area. The bike project was once again deferred, this time because Eugene had to help Brenda and Troy make some more weapons. The creator job was so rare because they could also function as weapons makers, armor makers, etc. The catch was that there wouldn't be any skills given to them by the world knowledge, just the basic passive skill of understanding underlying mechanisms, which meant that they had to study every skill by themselves. Basically, unless one was really an inventor by profession, the job of creator would not be available to them. Fortunately, Eugene had long transferred the contents of Althea's tablet to his, and he had all the reference that he needed. Another passive that Eugene had recently developed was Faster Hands, in which his hand speed could do twice as much without reducing accuracy. It was very cool to watch. Further, Troy had also awakened the weapons master's occupation, and everyone knew it. He threw a party, making quite an announcement. He was very smug at the fact that he could now make magic crossbows that could do more damage against the monsters here than Terran guns. She watched as the three tirelessly tinkered with various components splayed out on the table, and Eugene's hand was moving so fast that the her before the apocalypse may have a hard time following his movements. We have created smaller crossbows that could be activated by a finger. Although its force is weak, it is lethal if accuracy is good. Very assassin-like, Althea said, and Troy brightened at being acknowledged. Indeed, very cool. The enemies won't know what hit them. The group smiled and proceeded to discuss the other weapons developed during this time. Another one is the double-end axe. We use stone for the ends though, the dark-skinned Eugene said, wiping sweat off his face with his new cotton towel. It's a good weapon for a level E with stronger durability and higher damage. We also developed a similar spear, Brenda said. If you press this button, it will extend by a meter. It was amazing. There are limitations, however. Eugene said, the durability was compromised because of this feature. It would work well if it's iron. It would be great if we have some black stone, iron ores. Brenda said, I feel my level is increasing. I may be able to handle black stone iron tools soon. Brenda had been stuck at level D for many years. She stayed here for less than a month, and she already felt this barrier loosening. Too bad the chances are so small, but goblins are too difficult to find in our situation. Well, let's just do what we can, Althea said. I'll recommend to send missions to find ores. The other two brightened. Why didn't they think of it? Can we do it? Troy asked, not wanting to be rude, but the territory was really accommodating, right? Althea nodded. As long as the rationale is there, if it is good for the village, chances are it will be approved. Troy brightened, looking very admiring. How nice is our territory? Althea smiled, and so did the others. I'm sure the territory would be glad to know your thoughts. Later that day, she went to her room and opened the Lord panel, setting an announcement similar to the mass exodus from before. It was just that there was something a bit different this time. Althea looked at the follow-up question on the floating screen in front of her. It has been detected that there are citizens outside the territory at this time. Would you like to send the mission to them for 14 gold? This damned moneygrubber, charging 10 silver per person, still rounded up. But what can she do? She didn't have the luxury of time on her hands. Besides, a little gold was not much with her current net worth. Yes. That day, yet another mission calling for another exodus sounded across the territory. Territory Mission A. Find resource points for the territory, i.e. metal ores, special plants, etc. Requirements: none. Limits: must contain resources for at least 100 people. Rewards: 2,010,000 contribution points per team, depending on scale and importance. And like so, everyone in the territory gaped at each other, and the scores of people outside the territory flinched at the same time, looking in a direction with wide eyes. It's only been a day, the territory's doing big things again. Althea stood in front of the very popular training hall, just before dusk. To her surprise, she saw the long line waiting to use the facility, with people waiting patiently for their turn as they chatted. At this time, some stall owners had already brought their portable shops, and were selling some snacks and drinks to the line. People could never let an opportunity to earn money pass by. Whatever it was, Althea was just very happy to know that even when the day was ending, even after people had just gone home from a long day of work, people were still dedicated to self-improvement. From this line, it could be seen that a lot of people chose to spend their contribution points strengthening themselves first before anything else. She had worried people would choose to spend it on comfort first, but it seemed she thought too much. This was a wise choice for them, and it somehow made her feel proud of them like a mother. She also looked forward to using it herself. She was strongly prohibited, by her team and Mathilda, from using this facility during the past few days. Naturally, this was because she had just given birth, and the training hall was known for the physical and mental exhaustion it pushed a person to. There was news of ordinary people buying time with contribution points, but they came out half-dead. Of course, the gains were also not small. These ordinary citizens gained a level and were recruited into the guards shortly afterward. This was what she was after. She had remained stagnant in the beginning of level 6, not having been able to go out much after giving birth. And even if she did, for some reason level 1s, the predominant mobs, no longer gave her any experience. Now she had to make up for it. With a deep breath, she walked forward and lined up like everybody else. It was just that her presence had always been strong, and she was quickly noticed by the people lining up. Ms. Althea, one said, and everyone paused whatever they were doing and whipped their heads in her direction. She smiled awkwardly, a bit taken aback. She could only watch as the people lining up smiled at her panderingly. "It's Ms. Althea," one paused, "please go ahead." "Yes, Ms. Althea, please go here," one said, pointing at the space in front of him. Even without her contribution to the food industry, her striking beauty, or her position in the territory, her hiring rate alone was enough for people to want to suck up to her. Seeing that the people thought it would be an honor to give up their position in line for her, she was not polite, simply thanked them with a smile. "No problem, miss. We are glad to save you time. Everyone knows your time is super precious, equivalent to the food of our village." They looked so funny, she thought, and she laughed with them. "Well, I'll make sure we release some more products soon," she said just before entering the hall, and when it closed she could hear them cheer. Althea looked closely at the training hall as she entered. It was a 2-story building with around 500 square meters of footprint. There were about 10 rooms altogether per floor, with 5 doors facing each other on a 1-meter-wide hallway. At the end of the hallway there was a parchment with words written in strong strokes. Althea, who had been learning the local language, could make out the words "strength first, happiness later," which was quite amusing. She stood outside one of the available doors, determined by the fact that it was partially open, unlike the others that were closed shut. It had a very crude and simple in design. Althea went in and looked around the room, observing before doing anything. It was a room composed of stone all around, walls to floor, without any embellishments. It was more like a more refined quadrilateral cave than anything else. Disregarding the aesthetics, she then proceeded to the function. At level 1, the training hall could only manifest a maximum level monster of level 5. However, it was still much better than the puny level 3s outside. A familiar ding rang in her head as soon as she closed the door. "Welcome to the training hall. Please choose the level of training you wish to experience." Level 1. Cost 50 contribution hour. Level 2. Cost 100 contribution hour. Level 3. Cost 200 contribution hour. Level 4. Cost 300 contribution hour. Level 5. Cost 500 contribution hour. In the back room, this contribution point was automatically converted to its equivalent copper. From what she understood, 90% of this money went back to her pockets, while the rest went to somewhere else, likely going to the mysterious developer of the building. This amount per hour was understandably not cheap, and she mused it was probably because manifesting monsters took up a lot of energy. This also showed the territory's willingness to invest in the guards by providing them with a few hours of training for free, regardless of level, which increased the prestige of both the job and the territory even more. Before doing anything, though, she took time to check on her stats. Stats. Name Althea Witt. Age 25. Level 6 102,000. Life 900. Spirit 900 plus 50. Physical 175 plus 40. Agility 177 plus 10. Defense 114 plus 94. Mana 900. Physical potential B. Mental potential. Skills: Active elementary appraisal D, perfect aim D, quick shot D, growth skill mixture calculator LV1. Passive none. Elemental affinity wood, water, earths. Occupation pharmacist, archer. Titles: Lord of Altera, Elder of Plant and Pharmaceutical Studies. Overall rank S. Current status healthy. Equipment: head none. Ears none. Body leather jacket, cotton undergarments plus 2 defense. Synthetic vest plus 3 defense. Rainbow silk undergarments A, plus 80 defense plus 10 agility plus 50 spirit. Arms arm brace plus 1 defense. Legs leather pants plus 2 defense. Hands Bellagio bow B plus 40 80k. Leather gloves plus 1 defense. Feet eagle boots B plus 30 agility plus 10% weight reduction. Satisfied, she turned her attention to the holographic screen dedicated to the facility. After paying the money for a level 5 monster, a hologram-like thing appeared in front of her. It was a bigger, scarier version of the Nomos, one of the first monsters she encountered here. It was still similar to an ugly rat, but its green hue was darker and more menacing. Its short tail was now longer and sharper, and its teeth looked like it could kill twice as easily as the Nomos they had known. And so a woman and a monster stared each other down, with the latter's eye glinting with malice. Althea couldn't help but gape for a moment, looking at how there seemed to be saliva also dropping, how its fur was raised at the sight of her. It was so realistic. The aura of a stronger monster was intimidating, and it sent goosebumps up her spine. But more of her was excited. She'll finally get a good fight. Thanks for watching. Please sub and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story.